To ask the Scottish Government for what reason it has reportedly not allocated £450 million of available EU funding for investment projects in Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary Kate Forbes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Well, I can say in this chamber that the allegation is simply wrong because the programme is not yet complete. By the end of the programme, most of the funding will be spent, and the claims that other parts of the UK will achieve specific levels of spend are also wrong because their schemes have not closed either. We do not expect Scotland to be markedly different from the level achieved in previous schemes.
Liz Smith.
Well, I'm interested, Deputy First Minister, in that response, and it's the same response that the First Minister provided, that EU funds will be spent by the SNP in the future, but according to EU data, the Scottish Government has already returned €199 million unspent euros from the fund, and reports are that it is struggling to spend the other €331 million. Does the Deputy First Minister understand just why local government, those who are running enterprise and investment programmes and those who are running our cash-strapped public services are so angry?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, no, I don't, because Liz Smith's question fails to understand how this scheme operates. The scheme operates when the Scottish Government pays out funds at its own risk and then claims reimbursement from the European Commission. So the idea that the Scottish Government is sitting on lots of money which it will return completely fails to understand the way in which this scheme operates. Even when the scheme was in suspension, the Scottish Government was still paying money to partners. So there was no point in which partners were not able to claim the money from the Scottish Government and then the Scottish Government claims reimbursement. The other point I would say is that Liz Smith obviously sits on the Finance Committee, so she will understand the way in terms of the way the outturn data works. There is no outturn data, and when that is published, it will be provided to the Finance Committee very shortly after it's provided to the Scottish Government. So there has been no conclusion to the scheme. The scheme will continue. We will try and endeavour to spend as much of it as possible. 60% of the allocations are being made to local government. The rest is allocated largely to non-departmental public bodies like Nature Scot and Skills Development Scotland. There are close relationships there. We will continue to provide that money to partners at our own risk and then claim the reimbursement from the European Commission, as these schemes have always operated for years.
Liz Smith.
Deputy First Minister, when you say you will try to spend the money, surely that money was available before, and therefore it should have been earmarked for spending that was going to help the Scottish budget. Now, the Finance Secretary said in her recent budget statement, and I quote, "Quite simply, we cannot spend money that we do not have." So does the Deputy First Minister actually agree with the Finance Secretary, because you did have that money and therefore it could have been spent on urgently required investment?
Cabinet Secretary.
It is being spent. We have until 2025 to continue to spend it. It is being spent currently. It will continue to be spent. There has been no point at which it is not being spent. We will continue to maximise the funding available. I have looked closely at the source of the figures that were reported. I've looked at the European Commission's open data portal. I cannot in any way, based on that data, arrive at the £450 million that quoted. The point here is that we are maximising the funding that's available. Liz Smith is in a party which is stripping all EU funding from Scottish communities. And so for as long as this scheme exists, we will maximise the funding available. And many thousands of people, businesses and communities in Scotland have already benefited and will continue to benefit until the scheme closes next year.
Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In October 2021, Michael Gove awarded £23.7 million in levelling up monies, a partial replacement for EU funding to upgrade the B714, a strategic necessity. 2 weeks ago, I met him to point out that neither the funds nor an inflationary increase to deliver the project, in common with 60 of 71 across the UK, have been delivered, and Mr Gove is now retired as an MP. Will the Scottish Government press an incoming government to honour levelling up commitments made to deliver on essential strategic projects the outgoing UK Government promised?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we will, of course, press an incoming UK government, whatever the party, to honour its levelling up commitments. But Mr Gibson says that levelling up was a partial replacement for EU funding. And neither parties that are most likely to form the next UK government in any way want to return us to being able to benefit from that EU funding.
Michael Mara.
Audit Scotland confirmed that access to these funds is available to the end of June 2024. According to the EU's Cohesion Open Data Platform, the SNP have 27 days to spend €280 million. Even by their own standards of fiscal incompetence, this is chaos. The initial budget has already been reduced by €72 million due to, by their own admission, lack of demand or lack of ability to spend it. Can I ask the Deputy First Minister, if she doesn't recognise the £450 million figure, what is her figure in terms of the underspend? Also, were programmes fully matched by public bodies, or were cuts made by this government multiplied? And will the government supply the full figures at the end of June?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think the member, much like Liz Smith, fails to understand how the scheme works. The scheme works when partners receive money from the Scottish Government allocates the funding and then claims reimbursement. The risk entirely sits with the Scottish Government. This is not the case of grant funding coming to the Scottish Government and then it being allocated by the Scottish Government. And I would appeal to members across the chamber to understand how this scheme works. Secondly, the final expenditure figures will not be known until 2025. And yes, they will be published. In fact, they will be published openly and transparently, and they will reveal just how much money the Scottish people have benefited from by being associated with the European Union. And what they will also realise is how disappointing it is that no party likely to return to the UK Government, including the Labour Party, will in any way restore that funding to the Scottish people.
Gordon MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's welcome that the Deputy First Minister has confirmed that the Scottish Government's expectation is that most of that funding will be spent by the time these programmes conclude. Can the Deputy First Minister say any more about the projects these EU investment funds have supported in Scotland to date? And does she share my concern that the UK Government's replacement funding programmes fall far short of the EU funding lost to Scotland after Brexit?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think that last point is indisputable. But yes, there have been hundreds of projects across Scotland that have been supported in the last programme of European structural funds. And if we go all the way back to when they started in 1973, because that's how long there has been benefit flowing to the Scottish people, you see thousands of programmes. In the Highlands, new enterprise hubs like the Rural and Veterinary Innovation Centre, supporting children with foundation, modern and graduate apprenticeships. In terms of our climate change objectives, electric vehicle charging points and active travel schemes. And in terms of business, free advice and support for businesses and SMEs across Scotland. I hope that the Chamber can unite in recognising just how critical these funds have been, not just to my constituents, but right across Scotland. And it remains a matter of sadness that UK Government replacement funding, like the Shared Prosperity Fund and the Levelling Up Fund, is not like-for-like replacement.